Finland's military, a big win for NATO? What an interesting title. There have been a lot of controversies since Finland joined NATO. And in this video, 𝐋𝐈𝐊𝐄 will be answering this question. My name is MQ and welcome to my YouTube channel, where I react to music videos, documentaries, and any video I find interesting. So if at the end of this video, you find this video interesting, go ahead, like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so. So without further ado, let's check out this video.
News in 2022 that Finland was joining NATO got a lot of people excited. Finland, however, you can make a very interesting comparison between Finland and Italy. For example, Italy has a terrible military reputation, but most people don't actually know anything about Italy's military capabilities. Finland has a very good military reputation, but like Italy, most people actually don't know anything about Finland's military capabilities. So how excited should we be about Finland? I'm going to answer that question in today's video. My name is 𝐋𝐈𝐊𝐄 𝐒𝐒𝐂 and welcome to my YouTube channel, 𝐋𝐈𝐊𝐿𝐿𝐿, a conversation about world affairs, global conflict, military strategy, and anything else that happens to be on my mind. And as always, anytime if you're watching this video, if you like what you're hearing or watching, and please feel free to hit like and subscribe, because that actually matters. Now I'm going to do this video in 4 parts. In the first part, I want to talk about Finland's reputation. Where does it come from? What does it mean? Which means I'm going to take a brief look at Finland's military history, which is just something that I bet a lot of you don't actually know anything about. I, to be very fair, didn't know anything about this stuff until very recently, and so I'm going to assume that you don't either. 2, the second part, I'm going to talk about what distinguishes Finland from many other European countries with regard to defense policy and how it approaches all the usual questions about what its military is for and how does it decide where to invest its military resources, that kind of thing. In the third part, I'm going to talk about sort of more specifics. I'm going to get into some of the technicalities about the size of the Finnish military, what they have, what they don't have, how much stuff do they have. I'm going to get into some numbers, and yes, I'm probably going to mention leopard tanks because it always seems to come up in these videos. And then the fourth part, I'm going to try to wrap it all up in some sort of conclusion. So let's get to it. Part 1. Finland has a reputation for being a badass militarily, and it has everything to do with the only 2 wars that anybody knows anything about. Really, the only 2 wars that modern Finland independent Finland has been involved in, which is the Winter War of 1939 to 1940, and then the Continuation War, which went from 1941 to 1944. Both wars were against the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I know a little about the Soviet Union and the Winter War. In what I know about it is there was this country, or was it a region, Soviet Union. Like Soviet Union was made up of some small countries that wanted to take a part of Finland's land, but then Finland didn't want to give them the land, so they got into a war during one of the coldest times recorded in Finland. I'm just telling you guys what I know about the Soviet Union and the Winter War. So they had this fight. Finland's military was small compared to Soviet Union's military, but they defeated them in that war using so many tactics, like they camouflage themselves wearing white camouflage to be able to hide well in the snow and all that. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my idea of the Winter War and Soviet Union stuff. Yeah, I just wanted to give you guys a hint that yeah, I know something about the Soviet Union and the Winter War, where their strong military reputation came from. Yeah.
Union. Finland, you should know, was a Russian satellite before the Russian Revolution. It became independent as a result of the revolution. So Finland's really all about Russia, the independence from Russia, preserving that independence from Russia. But those are the 2 wars, and those are the wars that are the basis of Finland's reputation for being, as I put it, a military badass. Now, the truth of the matter is that Finland actually lost both of those wars. This really isn't surprising given the relative size of Finland versus the Soviet Union. I mean, there are only a few million Finns in the world, whereas the Soviet Union, they got a lot of that, a lot of people, a lot of everything. But what matters, and to most people who know anything about Finland's military history and the reason for their military reputation, is that the Finns fought like lions, perhaps maybe I should say polar bears, and they badly, badly mauled the Soviets, who achieved far less than they had hoped to achieve. In the Winter War, for example, the Soviets invaded and ended up grabbing about 9% of Finland's territory. But the key thing is that when Finland sued for peace, the Soviets actually accepted, even though by objective standards they were winning the war. Yeah, they were winning, but they were being bled heavily by the Finns. So the Soviets were like, okay, yeah, let's do a breather here. Let's take a ceasefire.
Oh, that means I was wrong. I thought during the Winter War, Finland won the war. Oh, I was wrong.
Then with for the continuation war, this time it was Finland that invaded the Soviet Union. They got all the way as far as Leningrad. They were part of the siege of Leningrad. And eventually, as the tide turned, as the Soviets got stronger and stronger, they were able to push back the Finns and recapture all of the stuff that they had lost to the Finns, and also basically managed to force the Finns to accept the loss of the land that they had lost in the previous Winter War. But once again, while the Soviet Union won or was winning, the Finns managed to bleed them heavily, such that the Soviets were willing to call it a halt and the war, even though Stalin could have probably kept going and destroyed Finland even, but he didn't think it was worth it. It was too costly, and it wasn't worth it. It didn't add up to him, which means that again, it's like the Finns won. But saying that the Finns won also, it does make me think of, like in school we were taught that the U.S. won the War of 1812 against Britain. I mean, did it? Well, yeah, actually, what we won, our victory simply consisted of the fact that we survived. Like, we survived a brush against with the world's greatest superpower at the time. Same thing for the Finns. It's not so much that their objective was ultimately survival, and they accomplished that. And from that point of view, they succeeded. Now, in the Winter War, part of Finland's recipe for success was its use of defense in depth and its use of terrain, and of course the cold. The Finns, especially in the Winter War, made really good use of fortifications, minefields, the many lakes that one finds in parts of Finland, especially the Karelian Isthmus, which was the focus of a lot of the combat. Finns in the Karelian Isthmus, right before the Winter War, they developed what they called the Mannerheim Line. It was a defensive network that was designed not to deter Soviet invasion, but rather just to delay it, to slow it down, to bleed it, and to do it by channeling the Soviets and inflicting into different killing zones and inflicting a heavy attrition. The fortifications consisted of bunkers, obstacles, ditches, and the like. Nothing like the Maginot Line, but the Finns couldn't afford anything like the Maginot Line. Now remember, the Maginot Line was designed ultimately to deter an attack. With the Manfred Line, again, it's not about deterring attack because they didn't have the means to do anything like that, but rather to just make an attack really slow and really painful. And again, I think by any measure, the Finns actually accomplished that. Now, it is true that the Finns were allies of the Nazi Germans, but they managed to avoid any recriminations from that fact from the Western Allies, and everybody basically forgave them for being pals with the Nazis, recognizing that the Finns had a larger problem on their hands, which is dealing with the Soviet Union, and particularly since Britain and France really were not willing to defend Finland against the Soviets in the 1930s, the Finns very obviously and understandably to everyone watching, had no choice but to become partners with the Nazis. Now, I do want to add this just because I find it really interesting that one of the reasons why the Finns were able to escape their liaison, shall we say, with the Nazis with the reputation unsullied was the fact that the Finnish government wanted and had nothing to do with the Holocaust and resisted any German interest in doing anything bad to the very small Jewish community in Finland. The Finnish government protected them. And reportedly, and also the Finns were very well aware of what was going on. It's been documented that Finnish diplomats and defense attaches in the Baltics kept Helsinki informed about what was going on in the Baltics. In the Baltics, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. I mean, it was basically the entire Jewish community was just massacred. Finnish diplomats knew. They reported this duly, and they were really appalled. So they knew, and they didn't want to have anything to do with that. There were at the time Jewish soldiers in the Finnish military. Some of them were actually fighting alongside the Germans, and at some point the Germans noticed this and objected, and apparently they asked the Finnish government to get rid of them. And the Finns, to their infinite credit, told the Germans in no uncertain terms to piss off. And that was the end of that. One last bit about Finns and Nazis. The Finns, until relatively recently, commonly used the swastika as part of their national symbols. They put it on their fighter aircraft, for example. But, and I really want to stress this, however bad this looks at first brush, it means absolutely nothing. It has nothing to do with Nazis. The Finnish Air Force, in fact, apparently adopted the swastika as their symbol that they put on their planes in 1918. That's, again, well before the Nazi Party. And it's a cultural thing having to do with Finnish culture. It has nothing to do with Nazi symbolism. Finally, one last bit about the Continuation War, the Winter War and the Continuation War, because I know so little about these wars, and I bet you know very little about these wars. I do strongly recommend reading a really great Finnish novel about the Continuation War called Unknown Soldiers. I put a link in the description, link to the book in the description, so please do check it out, and I recommend that you buy it.
Definitely
if you bought
check
it
it
using
out.
my link below, it's always nice because you get to support the channel a little bit, because I get it like tiny little commissions, like a half a cent, but whatever, it adds up. They also made a movie based on this book that's really good. I don't remember if it's on Netflix or Amazon, but either way, it's not hard to find. By the same title, Unknown Soldiers. So yeah, a Finnish war movie. Check it out. Finally, there's also a good book about Finland and the Holocaust that gets into all the details about what the Finns knew and didn't know, and what the Germans tried to do and didn't try to do, and how the Finnish government responded, etc. I put a link to that below in the description as well. Part 2. Let's bring the discussion to the present. See, Finland, you see...
Wow, I'm really enjoying this video because I'm learning a lot. Like the misconception I had about the Soviet Union and the Winter War has been cleared in this video. So you see why I love to react to these videos? I love it.
Was ostensibly neutral during the Cold War, which I guess just reflects the, the diplomatic realities of, the aftermath of World War II. But Finland has always had an advantage with respect to defense policy, certainly compared to countries like Britain and France and even Italy, which have broader aspirations, or rather often have a hard time trying to figure out what the priorities need to be, like who is the enemy and what do you need to do, and do you want force projection, or is it a global presence, or whatnot. The Finns have never really had this problem. For Finland, it's always been about Russia. Even during the Cold War, even though they're ostensibly neutral, it's Russia. That's their enemy. Not only that, but it's conventional warfare. Never mind this expeditionary warfare stuff, conventional warfare. That's the understanding. And I suspect that for Finns, when they would think about warfare, really ever since the end of World War II, that ultimately what they're thinking about is the Winter War, right? They're just rethinking the Winter War in their minds. I don't know this to be the case, but I have a hunch that's really the model that's playing in their minds. So that's the war that they're going to be fighting. This is really useful because if you have clarity, though, about who your enemy is and what kind of war you're going to be fighting against that enemy, this makes decisions about how you spend your money and how you organize your military really, really easy. So,
and talking about that, sometimes I wonder how Finland balances its military expenses and social welfare, like the free education they give, the free medical, the free healthcare, and all those stuff. Like sometimes I keep wondering because they spend so much on their military upgrades and all that stuff, and I wonder sometimes how do they balance these things? How do they balance their expenses on their military and social welfare? You guys, let me know in the comments if you have any idea.
So you don't have any of the problems that the British and the French do in trying to figure out, well, what are our priorities, because we want to be able to do everything. We want a multi-purpose, do anything military that could, come up that can handle, 1,000 different scenarios. With the Finns, no, none of that problem. There's really only one scenario. Now, this does not mean to say that after the Cold War, the Finns also, like everybody else, didn't try to profit from the Cold War peace, post-Cold War peace dividend. So their defense spending, which actually never reached 2% even during the Cold War, 2% GDP, dropped to about 1.1%, which I think was the lowest in 2001. It then began to climb upwards, slowly, but it really wasn't until 2022 when Finland joined NATO that it really started to go up. And now, from what I've read in the 2024 Finnish budget, the defense spending is now at 2.3% of GDP, and I've also read that the Finns intend to keep spending at more or less that same level for the foreseeable future. The numbers also hide a truth that's important for Finland, which is that Finland has maintained a conscript army. It still does. And conscript soldiers are cheaper than professional soldiers, which ultimately means that Finland is getting more for its buck, more bang for its buck by virtue of having conscript army. So when you're comparing defense budgets with other countries that have all volunteer forces, it's not exactly like a one-for-one comparison. The other thing is that the Finns have sort of like the Israeli.
And I want to add that their conscription model allows for a highly trained reserve force. Yeah, because even though they pay cheaper, they still get what they want. Like they have a military reserve somewhere, like they know anytime they need, making them have more hands in the military. Do you get more expertise? Like that? I think so.
Model where you have a small active force, which allows it to be kind of affordable, but a gigantic reserve force. So you can then expand these forces so that it reaches proportions, huge proportions, in the case of a national emergency. According to a 2022 article in War on the Rocks about Finland, which is quite good, I put a link in the description to that, Finland's active military only had about 19,000 people in it, plus about a 3,000 strong paramilitary border force. It takes in 22,000 conscripts a year for terms of training that are all under a year. There are different terms from what I've read, different periods of training. However, and this is the key part, in wartime, Finland, after it calls up its reservists, can field a 280,000 strong field army, and its entire military would weigh in at about 870,000 people. Now, I have seen different numbers than these in all sorts of sources, but all of them have numbers that are more or less the same order of magnitude. Yeah, I'm sure somebody's going to say in a comment, no, actually the number is, I don't know, 700,000 at 800,000. That's not my point. The point is like many hundreds of thousands, which is a very large military, particularly by European standards. It's large by NATO standards. And let's not forget, Finland only has about 5.6 million people in it. So that's a gigantic military force for a small population. This also makes it very different
of just
from
5.5
other
million.
small European countries. Denmark, for example, has a larger population. It's about 6 million, I think. And the Danish military is like 20,000 people total. I mean, the Finns could put it in their pocket. So again, this is a very serious commitment to defense. And because of the conscription and the reservist model, is something that Finland can do at a relatively small expense. It's much more sustainable. Let's talk about the Finnish military now. Let's get more into sort of the details. Thanks to this clarity that the Finns have with respect to the purpose of their military and the kind of war that they need to build their military to be able to fight, they have a military that I would describe as fit for purpose. They've got stuff that makes sense. They don't have that much stuff that doesn't make sense. Finland has a relatively large main battle tank fleet. It has 200 Leopard 2 tanks. Remember, the United Kingdom and France each has a main battle tank fleet of about 200. So much smaller country, much smaller budget, but the same kind of main battle tank fleet. It also has 100 CV-90 infantry fighting vehicles. I believe these are relatively modern. 613 Patria Passi APCs. I don't know how to pronounce that. 183 Patria 6x6 APCs, along with 396 MT-LBs and a variety of other armored vehicles.
Wow, their modernization effort is really impressive, especially with NATO standards. Like, they are really impressive.
To be honest, I had to Google this stuff because I didn't know what any of it was. So the CV-90s I'd heard of, Leopard 2s, of course, I'd heard of them. The Patria 6x6s are brand new, as are the CV-90s. The rest are fairly old, like the MT-LBs, which are Soviet-made from the 1970s. Now, honestly, to be honest, these numbers are less than what I had expected. I have to keep in mind the relative size of the population, the relative size of the military. Still, I would have expected more. More specifically, I would have expected more of the modern stuff, the CV-90s, or the Patria 6x6s, and much less of the old Soviet era stuff. But I do expect in the next few years to watch as the Finns are going to be buying more and more of the more modern equipment, and I think getting rid of more and more of the older stuff and perhaps giving it to Ukraine. Now, one interesting aspect of the Finnish army that I think clearly reflects the fact that it has never lost its focus on conventional warfare is the large number of towed howitzers that it has in its inventories. So we're talking, from what I've read, 474 old D-30s, 100 and 13 𝐂-83s and 56 𝐂-98s. Last two are Finnish made. At first I thought actually these numbers were kind of small, but then I realized no, these are huge. The French only have, from what I understand, maybe about 100 towed artillery pieces. The British have maybe 100, 120. The Germans have very few. And again, this reflects the fact that they're committed to conventional warfare. Why? Because everybody else is disinvested from from heavy artillery, and they're rushed to walk away from conventional warfare and to focus on things like expeditionary warfare. And I'm reminded of a story I'd heard from a French general about the howitzers that the French brought with them to Mali in 2013. The Serval Brigade had in its possession 4 Caesar howitzers. 4. I asked a French general, well, why only 4? And I was told, well, because that's as many as they were able to extract from the high commanders of the French army, who weren't convinced at all of the utility of heavy howitzers. And it was pointed out to me that the people who ran the French army, at least then, were light infantry guys who were all like specialists in expeditionary warfare. They had no sense or appreciation of the value of a 155 millimeter howitzer piece. The officers who were demanding their use were mechanized infantry people for whom it was self-evident that you needed howitzers. And they did get the 4. They put them to good use, although from everything I've read, it actually turned out to be a problem only having 4. Why? Well, because Caesars, as good as they are, 4 is just not enough to go around. And one of the things that the French ended up having to do is they had to do operations sequentially rather than simultaneously. Now, French Army doctrine makes very clear that you do simultaneous things, right? Because this helps unsettle and knocks the enemy off their feet. It makes it more difficult for them to respond. Because he only had 4, they had to do things sequentially, because he could only provide enough fire support for one operation at a time. Now, speaking of the Caesars, there is clearly a trend away from towed artillery, and it's also clear that, particularly in light of the experience of the Ukraine war, that all things being equal, you'd rather have self-propelled artillery than towed artillery. Mainly because the self-propelled artillery makes it a lot easier to do what's called shoot and scoot. Like you set up shop, you fire a few rounds, and then you get the hell out of there. However, the Ukraine war also has reconfirmed an old truism from warfare that when it comes to artillery, the more the better. It's as simple as that. Yeah, all things being equal, you'd rather have a Caesar than a D-30, but it's best to have a lot of D-30s. And it's cheaper to have a lot of towed howitzers than the self-propelled stuff. I mean, it's radically cheaper. So if you're a country who wants a lot of artillery and maybe you can't afford to buy a lot of self-propelled artillery, then towed artillery remains a valuable option. So it's still valuable. Speaking of self-propelled artillery, the Finns do have it. A combination of 1970s, 1980s stuff, plus and some brand new cutting-edge systems. For example, Finland has 18 new AMOS or AMOS self-propelled mortar systems and 33 Korean K9 self-propelled howitzers. These, I believe, are state-of-the-art. It also has 74 19...
Yeah, I've reacted to a video that talked about their upgrades, these vehicles. So yeah, I'm aware of this. And that's why I was like, their modernization efforts is really impressive, because they spend a lot to upgrade these things, and it's really impressive. And I wonder how they balance their social welfare and the expenses they make on their military.
70s vintage TS1 self-propelled howitzers. And as for rocket artillery, they have 35 RM70s, which according to Wikipedia are basically Czechograd rocket systems. And more interestingly, they have 41 American M270 MLRS, which I believe gives them a larger MLRS fleet than either the British or the French. Finland last year, from what I read, has approached the US to have its MLRS systems updated, so they're going to get, I don't know what they have to do to update them, but they're going to get the most up-to-date variant. I would expect to see more of these in the next few years. In other words, I would expect to see the Finns buy more self-propelled howitzers, more MLRS, and more maybe HIMARS, but that seems to be the trend, and it wouldn't surprise me if the Finns follow that trend and start investing more into having even more capabilities than they already have. Now, to this, I want to add that Finland has relatively large stocks of short and medium range air defense missiles. I could not identify any more long range air defense missiles or things like Patriots or or ballistic systems like the Arrow 3. But they do have really large quantities of anti-tank missiles, including, according to what I read, 70,000 of the older LAW or LAW rockets, 3 to 10,000 NLAWs, which are, I believe, quite new, and 900 Israeli-made spikes. I also read somewhere that Finland has 39,000 𝐋-𝐒𝐂 𝐒𝐂 anti-tank rockets. Yeah, I had to Google that. I had no idea what that was. It's a new, modern, one-shot anti-tank system, very effective. Turning to Finland's Navy, Finland has a small Navy, but it is also, like the Army, fit for purpose, with the purpose being what I would describe as a 𝐋𝐈𝐊𝐄 coastal defense. So it's not a blue water fleet. This is all about the waterways and the islands and trying to keep the Soviets at bay and maybe trying to deter maybe amphibious landings or that kind of thing. So what does it have? It has relatively small missile boats that are bristling with anti-ship missiles, including Gabriel anti-ship missiles. It also, and I think this is really interesting, Finland maintains coastal defenses. Coastal artillery. So these are old school, I think they're like 130 millimeter guns in bunkers. And they also have mobile coastal defense systems that are armed with a variety of missiles, including a variant of the Israeli Spike ER. I mean, I think the basic idea is like if you put like a Spike ER on a truck and can zip this truck around on the coast, then that's a really effective coastal defense system because the range of these things is enough, And I always like to imagine like what would the Normandy invasion have been like today? I mean, it couldn't have happened, but like imagine if the Germans had been able to fire anti-tank guided missiles at those landing boats. It would have been absolutely disastrous. But anyway, so that's what the Finnish are thinking. Now, as for the Air Force, Finland in the 1990s acquired F-18s, and reportedly Finland operates 61 of them. And then in 2022, Finland ordered 64 F-35As to replace the F-18s. The first F-35 is expected to arrive in 2026. By the way, a fun fact, Finland up until maybe 15, 20 years ago had bicycle-mounted infantry. Apparently, the infantry was ideal, the bicycles were ideal for moving infantry around quickly and silently through the woods in certain parts of Finland. And I learned this when I was doing research at the RAND Corporation. I was working on a study on what was called, the Army calls ultralight mobility. And I took an interest as part of that research in the military use of bicycles. I came to the conclusion, forgive the aside, but I came to the conclusion that bicycles actually were very useful and were underappreciated by modern militaries. And I also think that the real reason why militaries don't use bicycles more is, well, A, they look dorky, like soldiers on bikes, and
They actually
B,
look
they're just not like sexy from a point of view of like tech, like the idea like you want a machine, right? Something that's modern, whereas a bicycle is just, that's not modern.
like bicycles don't fit like military personnel. Like imagine you see a military guy on a bicycle in this modern era. My God.
At all. So it's hard to sell. And I would imagine just for that cultural reason alone, it'd be hard to get any traction, let's say in the US military or the Pentagon, if you're saying, let's not spend like $1 gazillion on some mechanized robots. Why don't we just spend like $200 a pop on some bicycles? Like it should make sense, but it wouldn't happen. It wouldn't make any sense. They would laugh at you. Anyways, the Finnish, I called, as part of the study, I called the Finnish defense attaché in Washington, D.C. to ask about the bicycles. And he said, yeah, they were great, but they got rid of them only because they had changed the concept of operations and decided that they just didn't need that capability, or they didn't need to do that thing in that part of Finland anymore. So that's why they got rid of them. Also, as an aside, so it's an aside to an aside, I asked the Finnish military attaché why the Finnish army did not have dog teams as part of its mobility. And his answer was that dog teams make too much noise in the woods, particularly when it's cold in the winter. Who knew? So part 4, putting it all together. What I see in the Finnish military is also is ultimately evidence of how easy it is to build a military when you have clarity of purpose. You know why you need a military and what kind of military you need. You don't need a multi-purpose, do everything military like what the British and the French and even the Italians are trying to build. They therefore have a force that gets them more bang for the buck. They can make decisions more clearly, more effectively, and the whole thing can just be a lot more efficient. And as a result, they have a military that is largely fit for purpose. They want to be able to make life miserable for attacking Russians. And I suspect that they can do that. I'm going to go so far as to suggest that with the Finns on side now and the Poles basically like racing to build what's soon going to be the largest land army in NATO, not including the Turks, then countries farther to the west, like the Danes or the Brits or the French, maybe need to be thinking more about how to help and sustain the Finns and the Poles in the fight, rather than to imagine themselves trying to add their own mass to the battlefront. Because it's not as if they have mass anyways. The Finns have mass, the Poles have mass. That might be enough, and that provided that they can be helped by the allies. So maybe allied or NATO gaming needs to, or planning needs to be not like, okay, how do we get our heavy brigades to Eastern Europe so that we can fight this fight, but rather, how do we help the Finnish and the Polish heavy brigades stay in the fight and not be worn down? Like, how do we keep them in the fight? And what are all the different ways that we can support them? Just a thought. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and thank you very much. If you look in the description, you can check me out at my Substack, also LinkedIn and Twitter, and my own website, 𝐋𝐈𝐊𝐄 and keep waiting. I post almost every week, and I've got a lot of stuff in the pipeline. Thank you very much. Bye.
Wow, that was an interesting video. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. And with all this analysis, what do you think? Finland's military is a big win for NATO or not? I think it is. It's a big win for NATO because they have a very strong military reputation. Like you said, they are a military badass. Like, they are good. So yeah, they are a win, a big win for NATO. So thank you guys for watching. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.